I'm Richard Curtis, I work for Adobe. I'm a solutions consultant with a focus on digital imaging. And today we're going to walk through the new features in Photoshop for Creative Cloud. But also, we'll look at the new features around the Creative Cloud as well, like the Behance platform and sharing your work with the community. So let's go straight into that now. Adobe has been working in the creative industry for 27 years. And throughout that time, we've been changing the way and supporting the way that creators want to work. The world's going through a huge change at the current time, and that is that creatives want to work differently. They want to be able to collaborate with other users easily and effectively with their creative files. And that's not just Word documents, that's PSD files, InDesign files, video and the like. But also, the world has changed from the way people consume information and also create content. So there's more mobile devices out there today. More people use iPads and mobile phones. And we're seeing a trend in the industry where photographers are making more films rather than just images. Also the way that publishers are creating electronic content for iPads and Samsung Galaxy devices rather than just print. And also the way that people are using the internet and the way they're creating websites is changing as well. And Adobe is really at the heart of the creative process. So for the creative community for the creative it's where you lose your thread. So for the creative community to really work well in this changing world, something has to change. And that change, from our perspective, is called the Adobe Creative Cloud. We're very excited with the Creative Cloud. It means we can do many more things, and we can do a lot more of innovation around the technology. But it's not just around the applications that sit on the local computer. It's actually more about the services that can be provided as part of the online experience. And that is around things like sharing your environment settings. So for example, you're a Photoshop user and you're using the application on your local computer. But then maybe when you get home to the studio or to your home environment, you want to work in exactly the same environment with the same brushes, with the same actions and swatches. And in today's world, that's very difficult to do. But with the Creative Cloud, it's really easy. We have something called Synchronized settings that really utilizes the cloud to move content from my local device onto my other application. Also, I mentioned before about collaboration, and the way people collaborate is changing. So typically, people will take images on their iPhone or their other cameras and then want to publish that to Facebook or Google Plus or Twitter. But also having a community of creatives is also important to them to get feedback and peer review on their work. So having a platform to do that is quite important. So last year, Adobe bought a company called Behance. With a Behance community, you're able to share your work, and we're going to do that today as part of the applications. And we're also, the way that we've integrated into Behance is quite unique, and we're going to talk about that as well today. And then from that collaboration point of view, you may want to create a portfolio to show your work off to others, other creatives, other people in the community, your friends, your family, whatever that may be. And as part of the Creative Cloud is the ability to do that. So the Creative Cloud really brings everything together. That's the full experience of creating content, be that pictures, be that film, be that websites, be it stories and narrative, and pull that all together to create amazing content, which can then be distributed via websites or via an iPad or just via a Behance community webpage. But we'll talk about that as we go through the demonstration today. If we look at what's in the Creative Cloud for a second, like I mentioned, it's not just about the applications. There's much more to it than that. If we look at the tools themselves, you've got a whole range of new tools inside the Creative Cloud, including Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign and Premiere, but also you have the Synchronized service. And the Synchronized service, which is available very soon, is an ability to take content from your local desktop and synchronize that to the Creative Cloud. You also have storage on the Creative Cloud as well. And in the membership version, you have 20 gigabytes, and in the Creative Cloud for Team version, you get 100 gigabytes. And that's free for you to use and put your content up there to share with the others, to share folders and share files, which is also coming soon, but also to share it with people not on the Creative Cloud. You're also able to put comments on that content as well. I mentioned the Behance community and the way you can share content with the Behance community is really quite a powerful thing for the creative. In the full Creative Cloud, not only do you just get the applications and the services and the community, but you also get a way to publish your content out to the iPad, and you can publish as many as you like as part of that process. All you need is an Apple ID, and then you can create that content and push it out onto the iPad via the Apple App Store. You're also able to create and host up to 5 websites on the Creative Cloud as well. Now, as part of Creative Cloud, you can also get access to fonts and to web fonts and to desktop fonts, and we'll talk about that in the demonstration when we get to it. But also the main point of the Creative Cloud is that you're not restricted to a lockdown feature set. In fact, new features will come out of the Creative Cloud as they're delivered out of quality control out of Adobe. So it means that multiple times a year you'll get new updates for those applications. You can also, don't forget, buy or subscribe to a single application. So for example, you can subscribe to a single Photoshop application, still get access to your desktop synchronization with the cloud, and also 20 gigabytes of storage, and also be able to comment and review. You also get access to the Behance community and also to the Behance Pro site, and as well as the updates that come out on a regular basis as well. So let's get into a demonstration of Photoshop and how that works with Creative Cloud and how that works with the Behance community. So as you can see, we've got Photoshop open, and Photoshop is looking like CS5, grey. So let's fix that straight away. I like to normally work with a dark interface. Now my environment at home is a dark Photoshop that contains all my swatches, all my brushes and all my actions, and I want to be able to utilize that on this machine here. But obviously that's not here because I'm in the office today. So inside Photoshop, when you install Photoshop CC, you're then logging into Photoshop with your Adobe ID. This gives you access to the Creative Cloud services that we're offering. So in here you have access to the synchronized settings. So let's look at the manage synchronized settings and see what's in there. Within the manage synchronized settings, you're able to sync all of these settings, or some of them, or none of them. You're also able to manage the conflicts. So for example, in the environment, in what I've just talked about, you have, I have home, some settings that I want to synchronize to this computer, but I may also have settings on this computer. So this enables me to manage that conflict of which one to take priority and which one to keep. So let's synchronize the settings now and see what happens. So as I synchronize the settings, Photoshop will go to the Creative Cloud, look for my settings profiles, and brings them back into this version of Photoshop. Let's see how that's getting on. Okay, as you can see, my environment has now changed, and I've now got the dark interface open, and the synchronizer setting has brought everything across from my home machine to my work machine. Now let's look at some other features inside Photoshop CC as part of this great release. And the first thing I want to talk about is Camera Raw. So let's take this picture here and bring this into Photoshop via the Camera Raw interface. So I'm going to open this with Camera Raw straight from Mini Bridge. And you can see it opens up the Camera Raw dialog box. Now Camera Raw is based on Lightroom. So this version of Camera Raw in Photoshop CC uses the Lightroom 5 engine, and it's called Camera Raw 8. Now it's got some great features inside here, and one of them is the Advanced Healing Brush, which I want to show you now. The Advanced Healing Brush is used to fix areas of the picture that I may have an issue with. So for example, I have a little mark on the cowboy's hat, which I may want to get rid of. Now I can do that very quickly by clicking on the Advanced Healing Brush. Now we used to have inside Camera Raw and Lightroom, and we still have, the round circular Spot Heal tool. But inside this version of Camera Raw and Lightroom 5, we have the Advanced Healing Brush, where we're not just able to use a round brush, we can actually draw the area to heal. So we can also aid it by something called Visualize Spots. Visualize Spots, when we turn on, creates a mask of any areas of the picture that may be that we may need to fix. So for example, dust spots, any marks on the images. So you can see here, this is brought up even more and really accentuated. So I'm able to paint over the picture and choose the area that I'd like to remove, or maybe partially remove. So we have something called the opacity, and the opacity enables me to change the opacity of the clone heel. And it may be that we don't want to get rid of this mark, we just want to dial it down a little bit so it's not as obvious. So I'm going to change the opacity to about 70%, 72%, and press Visualize Spots. And we can see there that it's still there, but it's not as obvious as it was before. Then we can say Open Object, and that will open that into Photoshop. Now let's do a couple of other modifications on this image, because I want to share this image onto the Behance platform. I'm going to make an adjustment. I'm going to go into the adjustment layer, and I'm going to do a quick levels. And press the auto, and it does a great job for me. Then what I may want to do is to start sharing that with my community. So straight inside Photoshop, I'm able to integrate to the Behance community. If I click on this little arrow at the bottom of any pane inside Photoshop, Behance, or the plugin for Behance, will take the image and compress it into the format for the web for me and for Behance. I'm then able to give this a title. I can call it Cowboy. I can put tags in so that users can find this content in the Behance network. So I can say Cowboy, comma, Arizona, comma, and then post a thread to start the conversation. I may want to say something like, please review and let me know if it works for you. And then I can obviously make it visible to people or restrict visibility. So I can make it visible to everybody or just my feedback circle. And the feedback circle is my peer network. If I press continue, I can then able to just crop the picture so I can show just a little thumbnail of what it will look like. So something like that is fine. And press publish. Then I'm able to promote that work on Twitter and Facebook and other social networks if I'm logged in. I'm just going to skip that for now. What I want to do is just check, make sure that's gone to the Behance community. So for that, I'm going to use the Creative Cloud app. So the Creative Cloud app is a way that I can integrate and interface with anybody in my community. If I look first of all what I have in the Creative Cloud app, I have my Home tab, and the Home tab gives me a timeline of everything that's happened inside my world in the Creative Cloud. So for example, you can see there I've just installed SpeedGrade, the colour grading software that we now have inside Creative Cloud. You can see there that a few people have already commented on pieces of work that I've had previously. So then I have a concept of the followers and people that I'm following, and they're able to interact with me through this panel. So anytime anyone looks at an image and marks on the image and comments or reviews the image, I get it in my timeline. So I can also see if people followed me. So you can see Xavier followed my work there. So it shows me a really nice way of interacting with my community. I can also get access to my applications. So rather than having to go to a website to download applications, I can see and get a complete update from this panel of where I am. So you can see that I have all my apps installed on my local machine, but I may, if I want to, install Dreamweaver and do some web development. I'll leave files for a second and fonts for a second and come back to that in a short while, but I want to go to the Behance platform. And you can see in the Behance platform, again, that you've got people posting work to the Behance platform, and that is now appearing inside that timeline for my activity. You can also, if you look at my work, you can see the projects that I've created and how many views and appreciations they've got. If I go to the Work in Progress tab, you can see that I have a current work in progress, which is the one I just posted from my Photoshop CC. If I click on here, this takes me into the Behance platform on the web, and I can then see that content. You can see there that the image has been displayed, but I also have a concept of revisions. So let's go make a change and make a revision to this version of the image. So I might want to do something around the colour and the look of this image. So let's go into my adjustment layers and put a colour lookup, and that colour lookup is going to be a 1950s film stock look, so really nice and edgy, and I'm fairly happy with that, but I want to know what people think about that as a work in progress from the original version. So I can then say post to Behance, it takes that current version and creates the right format for Behance. Then I'm able to choose whether it's a new piece of work or a revision to an existing piece of work. So I can choose revision and then choose which image it's revising. It's revising the cowboy image. I'm going to keep my tags and then put a little post on there to say, how about this version? And press continue. Now it may be, so it needs to have a thumbnail associated with it. So let's just create the thumbnail very quickly. And let's skip that section and just go again to the Behance work and see what's happened now. And you can see now on the Behance platform, you've got the current version, you've got a number of views and a number of comments. And you can also see the comments at the bottom of each piece. I park on the current version, but I can also go back to the previous versions and see those comments as well. So I can keep track. This is also very useful to show narrative around images, around image work you're doing. What we may want to do though, is we may want to then say, okay, this was the final piece. We want to publish this to a project. So let's go back to Photoshop. Now the first thing I want to do is to take this image and save it to a project on my Creative Cloud. So I'm going to use the Save for Web. I need to change the size of this image to make sure it fits. I'm going to make it 1500 pixels high and Save for Web. And I'm going to save it onto the Creative Cloud files. Now the Creative Cloud files is the desktop view of my Creative Cloud, and the desktop application that you saw earlier is responsible to take the file from my desktop and transfer it to the Creative Cloud. Now I've got a folder on here called Behance Projects, and in here I've got a Cowboys folder. I'm going to put this in and say Cowboy Final. You can see other pieces of work there as well that I've put up earlier today, and press the save. Now you see there in my Creative Cloud application it was just synchronizing, and it's synchronizing the content from my local desktop into the Creative Cloud folder. So as part of the Files tab, the Files tab enables me to open the local folder or the Creative Cloud folder. It also shows me how much content I've used in my Creative Cloud storage and if everything's up to date or not, and you can see it is. So that content was taken from my local machine. That content was taken from my local machine and put to my Creative Cloud account. So let's have a look there. So inside my Creative Cloud account, I have my Behance projects and I have my Cowboys folder. And in my Cowboys folder I have 3 versions of that file. And this version here, I have the Cowboy. Now, if I click on the little arrow, I can then post that publicly to Behance, or I can send a link to somebody, and they don't have to be as part of Creative Cloud. I can move between folders, rename it, and I can remove it. But actually what I want to do is actually go to my Creative Cloud account. What I want to do is go to my Behance account, and then put it onto my Behance account. So let's just go to Behance, and I have the connection of, I have this notion of projects. So I can create a project. I'm going to call this project Cowboys in Arizona. Press save. And then notice here I got a Creative Cloud icon. The Creative Cloud icon enables me to upload content straight into Behance from the Creative Cloud. So you can see here I have exactly the same view of my Creative Cloud files, and here's my Behance projects and my Cowboys and the Cowboy Final, which I'm able to select and then say done, and then bring that into my Behance project, at which point I can then add text, I can include other media, I can upload more files, and I can also change the colour of this project. Once I'm happy with that, I'm able to put some text here, and I can put some text to say Cowboys of Arizona, and press continue. I need to give it an upload an image so people can see what it's about. And crop and continue, and then I can just give it some more details. I'm going to say, well, this is for digital photography. I need to put some project tags in there, so I can say Cowboys, Arizona, and say here is my Cowboys project. I can then push that to something called a pro site. The pro site is a professional portfolio as part of Behance. It's like a website, and that website is driven by content that you're putting inside your Behance portfolio, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. I can also link this to a work in progress, so I can show the progress, how I got to a certain point in time of my project. Link that to Cowboys and press publish. This will then take that project. I can then promote that across my social networks, and you can see there now I have a project that's live and running. I also have works in progress, and I can then show my works in progress that you saw just now, and then I have everything all linked up. So now I've got a really good way of telling my story of my Cowboys in Arizona, and then how I got to a certain point in the image. Now I mentioned pro site. So my pro site, I'll just show you very quickly, looks like a very traditional website. And you can see here, this is off my main website, and these are just off the Behance community website. So for example, if I look at the Cumbamella, these are pictures that I've uploaded as part of my Behance profile, and they all come through, but they're read-only, which is a great way to show your work to a prospective client or friends or family. You can also push that out onto an iPhone app as well, and have the portfolio on an iPhone app. You can also have Behance on the iPhone as well as a Behance app, and these are all available through the Creative Cloud. Inside the Creative Cloud you have the Download Center, and in here you have the Behance platform, and you have the mobile apps that you can then download. So let's get into more things around Photoshop, now that we've made our Behance project public. Next great feature in Photoshop is something called Camera Raw as a filter. So for example, let's just take this image here and bring it into Photoshop. Now this image is a JPEG file. Now typically JPEG files will come into Photoshop as a standalone object because they're baked in and they're readable. They haven't got to go through a RAW converter. Camera Raw is typically used for a RAW converter and bringing in RAW images and converting those images into a TIFF or a JPEG or a PSD. But sometimes I don't have that luxury, and sometimes I want to be able to work on an object non-destructively. But rather than using just Lightroom, I can now use Photoshop to do exactly the same thing, but on a JPEG. So for example, I want to change the color temperature of this image. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is convert this into a smart filter. Now smart filters I'm using more and more inside CC, and just to explain what a smart filter is, it's imagine the image being put into a transparent envelope, and then any layers work on that transparent envelope, and the image inside the envelope is non-destructive, which means that I can pull it out at any point in time and work on it and then put it back in the envelope to the layers and then work on the image. So you can see here the difference is that my layer looks now like a little tab. I'm now going to place the camera raw as a filter on that smart object. At any point in time I can take the filter off and on and change the mask. So let's go to camera raw as a filter, and then I can change the white balance and press OK. I update the camera raw as a filter and update the contents within it. I can turn that on and off to show the before and after. If I want to get rid of the camera raw as a filter, I can just delete it. But I can go back at any point in time and go to my camera raw as a filter and do some more work. It may be that I want to apply some advanced healing to this and remove this section of the image and replace it with a section from somewhere else and press OK. That now updates that. So you can see I can work non-destructively on a JPEG. Now the great thing about using camera raw as a filter is that I don't just have to work on an image. It could be a layer, a group of layers which has been converted into a smart object. It could be a video, it could be layers with a mask, it could be an alpha layer, it could be many different things. So it's definitely something to have a look at, and it's a brand new way of working and a brand new workflow inside this version of Photoshop for Creative Cloud. Content Aware Patch, I just want to go into that for a second. Content Aware Patch is useful when you have a part of an image that you want to actually remove. So I'm just going to turn on the Content Aware Patch tool, and it's just under here, and it's got two modes, normal and content aware. The content aware mode is used to replace content from a source to a destination, but not just a true replica. It will look at the lighting and the texture and all the other elements of the actual picture, and make sure the actual the source is blended into the destination much nicer. I'm going to put that on a transparent layer so I can then work on this on the fix separately. And for to do that, I need to make sure that sampler layers is turned on, and I'm going to keep the adaptation to medium. I'm going to come back to the adaptation in a few minutes. Just draw a selection around this bag and replace it with another part of the image. And you can see there it does a pretty good job of replacing the destination with the source. But I can change in real time the adaptation, and this will change the content within the destination based upon new rules, and those rules are the amount of selection areas and going outside that patch. So for example, if I'm choosing very loose, which I am now, the selection will go and feather outside of the patch area. If I choose the very strict, it'll be just inside the selection area. So you can control how much tolerance you're giving content aware patch. A highly anticipated feature is the new camera shape reduction. So let's just bring this image here. This is a demo asset, and I'll show you a real world asset in a few minutes. But this image has a bit of blur to it. It's also got a sharp point, and the camera shape reduction is really around where you've taken a picture and you've attained focus, and then for some reason the camera moved, or you're taking the shot in low light or with the wrong focal length of the lens, and it forced the camera to move, or the actual image wasn't right in the frame. So let's just go into the new filter, and again I can use this on a smart filter, and go into the shake reduction under the sharpen menu and say shake reduction, and you can see here that I can change the analyzing point, and Photoshop will go through and reanalyze the image and then remake the pixels based upon the delta between the sharp and the blur edge, and you can see there it does a pretty good job. I can also create multiple sections, so tell Photoshop to look at different areas of the picture and reconstruct it from different places. Remember, this is when you took a shot with a camera and some parts of the image may be in focus and some parts may have blur. So you're able to look at those different parts of the scene and reconstruct appropriately. You can also look at the blur trace, and the Photoshop tells you where the blur trace of the image was, and you can also change the parameters that it's using to create the new image. So I was going to show you a real world image very quickly. So let's just find this image here. This is an image that I shot in India, and if I zoom in you can see there's a bit of blurring around this motif, and actually there's a bit of blurring around this light. So let's go and fix that now with camera shape reduction. Let me just zoom in while it's doing that. I'm going to make this a bit smaller so it actually does it a bit quicker. And you can see there, if I zoom in, it sharpens that up quite nicely and rebuilds those pixels. If I just move over to the little light and bring out the loop, I can see a before and after. So before was blurry and after was sharp. So you can see it does a pretty good job on real world images as well. So that was camera shape reduction. Pretty handy. There's a new enhancement to sharpening inside Photoshop, and that's Smart Sharpen. So I'm just going to go into this image and just go to the new sharpening algorithm called Smart Sharpen. And I need to turn on Legacy to show the old method first. And if I just look at the picture, you can see here there's a lot of noise being generated when the sharpening's been applied. Also around her skin as well. I think we could do a better job there. So I'm just going to turn off the Legacy and turn the non-Legacy on, so the new algorithm, and you can see straight away it's cleaned up all this noise and it's done a better job by sharpening her skin. And bearing in mind this is at 200% of the original sharpness. I can also push that higher and do a better job, and it still won't increase any noise. If it does increase any noise, you can then remove it just by using the reduce noise slider. So again, pretty handy new feature. Now sometimes it's important to upscale an image. So this image, for example, is only 499 pixels wide by 750 pixels high. So if we try and resize this using the traditional method, which is bicubic smoother, and by the way, automatic will choose the new version over the old version if you do decide to do it upscaling, but I'll do it manually for now, and say bicubic smoother for the manual. And we'll just increase the size of the window, and I want to increase the size of this image by 300%. If I navigate around this panel, you can see there that I actually lose some sharpness on this cross at 300% using the original bicubic smoother. If I now turn this to be the new algorithm to preserve details, you can see that I start keeping the detail in the cross. Let me just zoom in there again so you can see there. You can see I start to have those details. If I just turn that on to bicubic smoother, you can see I'm losing those details. So the new algorithm is so much better when it comes down to upscaling. I want to show you a couple of things for designers now actually, and there's one called rounded rectangles. This is a composite of a website, and you can see here that we have a rounded rectangle. Now I want to select that rounded rectangle, so I'm just going to move to the direct selection tool and select that rounded rectangle. I'm going to move Photoshop into a normal mode, and you can see there that when I've selected my rectangle, it selects the rectangle as a live shape. If you've saved an object as a live shape, so just drawn with a rectangle or rectangle with rounded corners, I can then modify the rounded corners by using the rounded corners dialog box at any point in time and change these without having to go redraw the rectangle. I can also unhook all four corners from each other and work on them individually, so then I'm able to change the way each corner looks. At any point in time I can go back. There's also something called isolation mode. If I move to the move tool with the V key or press the move tool and I right click on an object, you can see I have the rounded rectangle, but also down the bottom I have something called isolate layers. So let me just turn off all the layers for now. So deselect all my layers, and I'll turn isolated layers on, which should clear the layers palette. If I then right click on this rounded rectangle, I can say pick up the rounded rectangle, and it'll only show me the rounded rectangle inside my filter list. If I go over here and pick the backpack, I then pick up the backpack. If I go down and pick up an object over here, I pick up the wetsuit, it shows me just a wetsuit. So then I can work on just these objects as part of a larger layer comp. If I'm doing selections, like for example this one, I'm going to turn the mask off for a second. I may want to do a selection and cut around this area around here or this area around here. To do that, I typically make a mask, and I can make a mask and then it shows me the mask has been applied to this area and cuts out all that background. Now maybe if I show you the mask that I need to tighten this mask area up and actually refine this selection, and I can refine it using a brush tool or levels command on the masks, and that will tighten the mask up, but I will lose that lovely diffuse edge that I may have on this mask. So to fix that, I select the mask and I can go to a feature called minimum or maximum. But minimum will set the minimum limit of the mask. Now you can see here that I'm able to see the mask and I can see this particular area of this selection. Now typically I would increase the radius to say much smaller than this, but you can see here in this example it's provided the edge to be quite square, and that was an issue with the old minimum maximum filters. However, now under the preserve we now have something called roundness, and roundness will keep the bias towards the roundness in the mask, which gives me a smoother transition. I'm also able to choose decimal places for the mask and provide much more refinement when it comes down to my selection. I'm also able to use the lasso tool just on a certain area of the mask and say filter, other, minimum. And now I'm just going to work on this area of the mask as opposed to the whole mask. And I'm able to use the bias on this lassoed area of the selection as well. Automation has always been a key part of Photoshop and being able to automate tasks within inside the menu. And in CS6 we enabled something called tool recording, which means you can automate tools and the tool recording. So for example, you could paint a frame of a picture and have that on every single image. But the problem with actions were that you only had one set of actions per logic routine. So for example, if you had a picture, if you got pictures that are portrait and landscape, you needed two actions. It was difficult to have an action to run both portrait and landscape unless you knew something like JavaScript. So now, as part of the conditional actions inside Photoshop for Creative Cloud, we're able to have logic that we can place around multiple actions. So for example, I may want to apply copyright information to landscape and portrait images, but depending on if it's landscape or portrait, put the watermark in different places. So I have two actions, one for my landscape, one for my portrait orientation, and I have something called if. And the if is logic to say that if my document is landscape, do the landscape watermark, otherwise the portrait watermark. Let's run that now and see what happens. So go into my automate tools and automate the batch, and inside the action I want to choose the if copyright action, and I want to choose a source folder. So I go and choose my conditional start, and you can see there I've got 4 files, and I've got 2 portrait and 2 landscape. If I choose those, and then I want to choose a destination to be a folder, and choose that folder to be conditional done, and press OK, and then press OK. And this should run through the action, selecting the landscape action if it's landscape, and portrait action if it's portrait. And you can see there it's running through those files and putting the action on them as we go through. If I just go to my Finder, in Conditional Done, you can now see that the watermark has been applied to different places, depends on if it was landscape or portrait. So another really handy feature, save you lots of time when it comes down to logic in actions. I want to just briefly talk about 3D. We've got a brand new great thing in 3D inside CC, and that is something called painting. So we open this car up. Okay. So as we know, or maybe we don't know, in CS6 we overhauled the 3D engine inside Photoshop, and that comes through into CC. 3D is also on the graphics processor, which means it's ultra fast. So I can grab this 3D object and move it around, and I can bring in objects that are 3D print objects or STL, OBJ, wavefront, and many other different types. So if I'm bringing this object, this is an OBJ that I'm bringing into Photoshop, I may want to do something with it. Not only can I change the size of this by just scaling it or bringing it forward or backwards in the grid, but I'm also able to look at the car itself and look at the mesh of the car. Now what I want to do is, if I open up the mesh, you can see it's not very good because it wasn't being created properly. So I want to recreate the mesh. So at any point in time I can go to my 3D menu and choose regenerate UVs, and then regenerate the mesh itself with fewer seams, and then I'm able to double click, and you can see now that I have my mesh. So I want to just tile the window and see both panes at the same time. So go to a view, arrange, tile, and you can see them both at the same time. I need to make sure they're both in the same bit depth, so it's 8-bit over here and 8-bit over here, and then move to my brush tool. When I'm in the brush tool, I'm then able to paint either side of the object. So let's go pick up a swatch. So pick up my swatches, and now this is all obviously linked into Cooler as well, so I may want to go to my Cooler website, and look at my swatches. So in my themes, I have something that I did this morning using the Colour app on the iPhone, and this is the dark skies. I can then download that, which came from my iPhone, and selected that from actually a picture in my house this morning, and I now have access to my dark skies, which I can then open with Photoshop, and you can see that brings it through into the swatches panel. So I'm going to pick a swatch, I'm going to pick a colour in the swatch, I'm going to pick a black over here, because I want to actually paint the wheels first of all. And you can see there that as I move over the wheel, you can see that this is the wheel, that's the tyre, this is the wheel, that's the wheel, that's the tyre, and so on and so forth. But I'm able to paint in live mode directly on the object. If I just zoom in there to get a better view, I'm able to paint on my object very quickly and make it look quite nice. I may want to go and paint something with the headlights, so I can hover over here, and you can see that my headlights are actually over here. So let's just zoom in there, and you can see as I zoom in, you can see the meshes. Now I'm able to pick a different colour. Let's pick up a dark blue, and I can paint these. Now as I'm painting them, I'm painting the far two on the right, I'm going to paint the left hand side now. I can switch between the two and get a good view over my new painting. If I then zoom out, I can then look at that and make sure that's the right colour. But obviously what I may want to do is check the lights and make sure that's going to work right in the light. So you can see there how I can live paint on an object in 3D mode. Now also in 3D, a couple of things we added are around creating multiple objects. So I can right click on an object, I can now create a duplicate object and an instance object. And the difference is that a duplicate object will create a brand new version of this object that I can then use. So you see now I've got two objects that I can then put into my scene. And I have that running separately. So I've got two. Then I can also create an instance object. An instance object is where it will refer to the parent. So if I do anything with the parent, the same will be applied to the child. At which point, once I've finished, I can then bake that and bake that in. So that's a quick overview of 3D live painting inside Photoshop for CC. And that's really quite flexible, so it's worthwhile having a look at that. The last thing I'm going to show is something to do with photography, and that's around HDR. So if we just take some HDR images, so these three here that were taken in Yosemite National Park, I want to bring these into Photoshop. So I can bring them in as HDR, and using HDR processor inside Photoshop to do that. Now you could bring them in through Lightroom, and Lightroom 4.4 supported 32-bit TIFFs, and you could bring them in and support that 32-bit dynamic range. But you would go through Photoshop to do the merge, or the HDR merge, and then bring that back and then alter the highlights and shadows. But now obviously we've got camera as a filter, we're able to use the camera as a filter on a 32-bit HDR object. So I can now choose to remove the ghosts, which removes any repeating patterns of any trees or anything that's been moved by wind. And then I can take up the 32-bit mode, and you can see if I take off the complete toning in HDR, you can see all the tones that I have inside my picture. If I turn on this complete toning in Adobe Camera Raw on, this will now be put back into Photoshop and then open up the Adobe Camera Raw processor. So let's just do that now. These are real size files, so they take a little while to bring together. And you can see it brings it through into Photoshop, but then automatically brings it straight through into Camera Raw. That enables me now to use the new Camera Raw sliders for highlights and shadow recovery and really extract the full tonal range of that image. So now I go into these highlights and shadow sliders in 32-bit TIFF mode and just pull out all those highlights and all those shadows, maybe give it a little bit of clarity to make it look like it's dimensional, and I can just walk through that scene. Press OK, and that now puts a Camera Raw filter on it. So if I look down the layers, you can see Camera Raw as a filter. Then you have a full 32-bit tonal range image straight into Photoshop, of which you can then do what you want with. So there you go. That's a deep dive into all the new features inside Photoshop for Creative Cloud, but also Behance, explained about the Creative Cloud app and the Creative Cloud. So I hope you enjoyed that, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.